We will wait just a few moments for people to log in. And while we're doing this, I am going to get my slides ready to open. Okay, can you see my slides?
Yep.
All right. And here we go. We're happy, those of you that have joined us live. And if you were not able to, then it's great if you're watching the recording now. Welcome. I'm Shirley Crest-Dudley, the founder of Fractional Executive Connection. And this is a platform to find seasoned executives to help your business grow. If you're listening live, then drop your name and company in the chat. And if our co-hosts for the day can also take a moment and drop your name and your either LinkedIn and or email in the chat. So why do businesses get stuck? Most business owners are already working hard, and I'm sure you all work very hard. Your teams work very hard too. And when growth slows, the first answer is usually not do more. The better question is what's out of alignment. Sometimes the issue is sales. Sometimes it's operations. Sometimes it's unclear priorities or poor follow through. And once we find the misalignment, we can fix the right thing instead of just trying to fix everything. When a business feels stuck, it helps to sort out the problems into one of four areas. Growth, about whether enough opportunities are coming in. Operations, whether the workflow is flowing smoothly. Strategy, whether your business has clear priorities. Or execution, whether your ideas are actually turning into results. So figuring this out can bring a lot of clarity. Here's a few simple questions to help spot the real bottleneck. Are you clear on the top priority, or do you have too many competing priorities? Are short-term fires constantly pushing out long-term strategy? Or are your decisions actually getting made, or are they just getting discussed over and over? Do you already know what needs to happen, but you struggle through follow through? You can just put in the chat if you know already what's slowing down your business. So this is the point I want everyone to remember. When a business is stuck, the answer is not to fix everything at once. That usually creates more overwhelm. The fastest path is to identify the constraint causing the most drag and focus there first. And that's where a seasoned fractional executive can be extremely valuable. They bring experience from solving similar problems across other businesses, so they can often spot the real issue faster than someone who's buried in the daily work. Our platform, Fractional Executive Connection, allows you to contact executives directly with no referral fees. We call them fractional executives. And there are a lot of other terms, could be interim, but it's not a part-time employee. They're there in a consulting advisory role. A fractional executive is adding another person to your team. Finding seasoned leadership can help your business move from confusion to clarity. And they can diagnose what is really slowing the business down, help the owner choose the right priorities, align people around the decision, and guide the follow-through. And for many growing businesses, this is a practical way to access executive level thinking without hiring a full-time executive. So here's a 3-step process. First, identify the biggest constraint. Second, focus on one fix at a time. You pick one priority and you assign ownership and track the progress. Third, you're going to want seasoned help. A fractional executive can help you avoid guessing, reduce trial and error, and move faster because they've already seen problems before. That outside perspective can be the difference between staying stuck and finally gaining momentum. Now, I want to turn it back to the business owners. What's slowing your business down right now? Is it too many priorities? Or you're putting out too many fires? Too much discussion? Not enough decision? Or do you know what to do, but it's just not getting done? You can drop your main issue in the comments, and we'll be answering your questions live. If you're watching a recording, you can still drop your issues in the comment, and we'll be able to follow up with you afterwards. And a little behind the scenes information, we want to give you a lot of value from our experts today. So I've asked them to keep their answers short to less than a minute to give you as much content as possible from all of them. Now, I want to show you who our co-hosts are for today. Cherie Webb, Pamela Murphy, and Steve Vetter. And I'll have to check to see if Steve has made it online. If not, it's going to be up to you two ladies to help with the questions. So give me just a moment to stop sharing my slide. And all right, while I'm trying to figure that out, because it's the stop sharing is not showing up, then I'm going to direct some questions to each of you. First, Cherie, from a communications and leadership perspective, what's something business owners often think is a problem, but it really isn't?
Good afternoon, everyone, and good afternoon, Shirley. Something that business leaders often think is a problem, and it's not, is a problem with the strategy or whatever it is that they're trying to roll out. They spend a lot of time rethinking the work that they have put in, when in reality, it's a communication issue. Whether there is leadership misalignment, or unclear priorities for the teams, a lot of times it hasn't been communicated properly. Leaders sit with decisions 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years, sometimes before a decision is shared with their teams. And when they do, the expectation is that the teams will automatically know everything that there needs to be done. And that's just not the case. And you can't just rely on one announcement for employees to get it and then be able to execute successfully. There has to be a consistent, repeatable, embedded communication plan in the strategy in order for everyone to be aligned.
Thank you. Pamela, how often is the real issue not capability, but lack of alignment around priorities and decisions?
Sure. I think most people will agree that misalignment is a common issue. And most teams have the talent and they have the capability, but they lack a shared clarity. And so, an example could be teams working really hard on a project. They all have differing priorities as they're moving towards a common goal. And then sometimes the leader gets inconsistent outcomes. Like a quick fix on that could be something where you start a meeting and you have 1 to 3 priorities that you set at the top of that meeting, and then you come away with shared agreement on what those priorities are. A long-term way to look at it is that there really should be some kind of established and integrated framework, right, in which you are setting the priorities, you're making the priorities visible, you're communicating, like Cherie will tell you, communicating the priorities on a consistent basis. And then that trickles down to things like teams goals and performance measures and things like that. Because it's one of these things where, an alignment really steers an organization and how it's run. And, that really can help you with that kind of shared strategic framework. So you're not chasing the problems. You're not chasing the fires.
Thank you. All right, here's another question. Let me know who would like to answer it, or if you both want to give a short answer. Why do short-term fires so often win over long-term strategy?
Pamela, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I think Cherie and I are probably laughing too because we're used to putting out short-term fires, both in our line of work. I think short-term fires, the reason they are the ones that come bubble up, right, is because they're urgent. and it takes time and an investment up front. But what happens is, if you don't kind of have a plan to address those strategically in the long term, you're going to be reactive in your approach, right? And so, like, an example could be, and I've been in this situation too, where a leadership team's dealing with a crisis, right? And maybe it's a crisis that takes a whole week, where we're all hands on deck and you're dealing with it. And then the crisis is over and everyone's exhausted and tired, and you have to kind of go back to your day jobs, right? And what happens then is we kind of delay then putting in place a strategic plan on how we address those fires when they come up again, right? And that sometimes becomes a cycle, call it the hamster wheel, right, of crises. And so dealing with it in two different ways. One could be like a quick fix. One of the things I do is put time on your calendar that's non-negotiable. So that is time on your calendar when you're just talking about what happened, what didn't work, how you can fix it, and then putting together kind of a strategy across your enterprise or across your team or function, and how you deal with it later, or how you address it when it comes up again. And then another thing would be, when I think about long-term fix, would be more separating operations from strategy, even though they work together hand in hand. But there needs to be kind of a strategy in how you deal with crises and fires, because they will always be there, and how you address those throughout the year. That's kind of how I think about it.
And I agree with you. You said something and it made me giggle once again, because when the crisis is over, everyone wants to go back to business as usual. And God forbid we document how we handled that crisis. And that's one of the things that I work with leaders to do from the onset. If there is a new initiative, a new strategy, a new anything, let's look at it holistically, not just from the leadership perspective, but let's look at it from a risk management perspective.
Yes.
Let's take all of the stakeholders into consideration so that we can put together a potential crisis plan, so that when something comes up, and it will, we are prepared. There isn't necessarily a crystal ball to predict what the crisis will be, but if there is a plan in place, you modify that plan for the crisis so that you can continue to have business as usual while dealing with the crisis, so that it's not necessarily an all hands on deck situation. The people that are assigned to handle certain aspects of that crisis, that's when they're put into play so that that crisis can be managed properly.
Thank you. Thank you both. All right, Sheree, if you'll start with the next question. Where do you see execution break down the most often?
The very beginning. And the reason why I say that, and I want to be clear, no leader sets out to do a bad rollout. That's just not how we are. What happens is, a lot of times we take certain things for granted. Shirley will do it. Pam's team will take care of it. And when we do that, something falls through the cracks, which is one of the reasons why I am so adamant about communications not being seen as a soft skill, but being seen as an operational lever for every initiative we do at work. A lot of people will disagree with me about that because it's a non-revenue generating area. However, who's the first team somebody calls when something breaks? It's communications. We need to send an email. We need to fix this. We need to manage our reputation. We have a crisis. And so if we are important enough to call to fix things in an emergency, let's have a seat at the table in the beginning so that we can help you navigate some of those things in the beginning. Having employee perspectives at the table. It's not a soft skill to have to understand not only the business, but how people will perceive the decisions that are made by the business. Most communicators are very knowledgeable about business things because we've had to learn it in order to be able to communicate about it. So things break down from the very beginning when you are not thinking holistically and having your communication partner at the table.
Thank you.
Yeah. I can just jump in. I couldn't agree more on what Sheree has laid out in terms of consistent and transparent communications. And I would just add to that, I've seen communication breakdown too. I've seen execution breakdown when too many people are involved and there's not ownership. And so, I think a lot of us have been in rooms where we're all working on like a key project and we're having these meetings, but when there's no accountability or no set deadlines or, progress then fades, right? Then people leave and they go to working on their other priorities. And so those things are not necessarily always communicated, right? And so, obviously when you think of like something you could do immediately would be making sure you're assigning ownership to drive progress, right? And making sure you have someone reporting that out and defining who they're reporting that to. Right. And then, of course, we always think long term because we're also very strategic in all of our work, is that creating a culture of execution is key. And that involves everybody across the enterprise and the company. You have to have things where you're setting measurable priorities, you're setting regular, like I said, regular updates and ownership and accountability and defining decision making. People don't always do that. Leaders are busy. And sometimes you're going in, you say, hey, I need you to do this and this and this. That's like, giving people more task-based work instead of really defining. I know we'll talk about this a little later, but instead of really defining who can make decisions and on what. And that's where I see a lot of the execution breakdown. And again, it all kind of goes back to what Cherie was saying. So much of that is consistent communication.
Okay, and I don't remember. Cherie, did you answer this question?
I started, yes.
You started. Okay, great. I'm going back and forth between my notes here. I believe both of you also kind of answered the next question, but it's still important things to mention again. What is the most common reason businesses know what they should do, but they still don't get it done?
Do you want me to start since Cherie
Yes,
started? Okay.
I won't remember which one of you.
Sure. I'll start and then pass it to Cherie. This is common. This is just a common thing you see a lot. I think we're all just really busy. Leaders are very busy. And I think sometimes there's like progression paralysis that happens, right? And some of it I think comes from a lack of sustained accountability. When people are pulled in so many directions, right? So, how many times have we all been in meetings where there's lots of ideas thrown out and strategy sessions, we're brainstorming. But again, going back to Shirley, what you said before, we kind of answered this a little bit in the sense of, but there's no structure. There's no clear ownership. There's no deadlines. We're not doing measurable priority setting, right? And then we do all this, and there's all this great work left on the table, and then we walk away and go back to our day jobs. So again, I think, it's more of a shared responsibility, and the leader needs to take this on, where you need to, when you're having meetings, I find it really helpful when you end a meeting of, who owns this? What does success look like? How are we going to review this progress? How are we going to report that back? And how are we going to revisit it? And so we can then assess if we need to pivot, right? So all of those things need to happen. Again, I'm big on systems. So when I look at the long-term approach, you really kind of want to have a system. When I talked about having a system of execution across the enterprise, you really need to have an accountability across the system, across the enterprise, right? And then everything else will trickle down from that.
I agree. And it goes back to leader misalignment. If clear deliverables, if clear ownership lanes, if clear strategy is not defined from the beginning, that is going to trickle down to every layer of the organization. So if the three of us are leaders and we're sitting in a meeting and we're confused, how do we expect our teams to have a clear direction in which to follow? And they just don't. Whether that is assigning someone a task and them having ownership of the task, but not being able to make the decisions that fuel the task. All of that stems from leadership alignment, being clear on who does what and why. And we have to make sure that we're saying it more than once. Just saying today, you are in charge of this That's in today's context. That's in today's structure. But 2 weeks from now, when things change, and we know they will, because the only thing that is constant is change, we need to revisit if I am still responsible, if you are still responsible for those things, so that the work continues. I saw a post the other day. A gentleman said that companies were built for stability, but the amount of change initiatives that we have is in direct contradiction to that. So we don't know how to operate in that environment. And I thought that was such a great way to say it, because the one key thing there is letting people know what they're supposed to do. Employees are not resisting change because they just want to resist. They're resisting because they haven't gotten clear information, or they don't see themselves in the strategy. So they don't understand how it's going to work, or worse yet, they know something you don't know about what you've rolled out, and they can identify why it won't work. So it's important to be upfront and as comprehensive as possible from the outset, because that has a trickle effect to so many different things.
Thank you. Here's a scenario. A team has a lot of ideas, but projects keep stalling. What's usually missing? And Shri, if you'll start.
Clear direction. They have a lot of initiatives, but what's the priority? What's the end goal? What are we trying to achieve? Um, what is our measures of success? Pam mentioned it earlier. Well, there's so many questions with that, and it's sad, because what you just mentioned as a scenario is happening to a lot of people, and probably people that are watching right now, that they have so many things that are on their plate, and they don't know which ones to tackle first. And if they go to their leaders to try to get clarity, sometimes their leaders don't know as well. And so it's really important, when given a task or when given these initiatives, let's find out the why. And if we know the why, we can get to the what, but communicating what the why is and tying that to the business strategy. And believe it or not, every level employee needs that connectivity. And we've got to learn how to articulate that to them, so that they can know, so that they can do their little task in their little corner of the company to the best of their ability, because we are all working to try to meet the objectives of the strategy.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Pamela?
I couldn't agree more with Shuri. I mean, there are so many staff, employees that I've seen that don't understand how they fit into the larger strategy. And so they don't, it's just not clear. And I think that, and I completely agree that so much of that has to do with kind of a lack of structure and discipline in leadership. You know, we all know, and Cherie mentioned this, we've all been in the meetings where we have these huge brainstorming sessions, or, you know, you go into an all hands and there's all this information that's given to staff, and staff leaves and they have no idea where they fit within what was just given to them. Right. And so, you know, when I think of something that you could do immediately, it would maybe to have, as a leader, have more tailored focus on a few initiatives with deadlines and roles and responsibilities. So you can, you know, like Cherie said, people need information. They need to know how, you know, to move forward with the information they've been given with their jobs. And so I think you could have some tailored focus there as a leader. But again, I'm always going back to systems, you know, having kind of a framework around, you know, that kind of, it goes back really to a structured execution framework, right? Going back to the questions that Cherie had, you know, can we execute this? If we can, what structure and resources need to be put in place in order to execute this and produce results? I mean, sometimes if you start asking those questions, sometimes people look at the problem at hand and maybe it doesn't become the biggest priority that they need to deal with. Or maybe, you know, once you start to kind of question the resources you need and you know, the work that needs to be done, and you start weighing that against other priorities, sometimes just asking those questions and having that honest conversation, you can start to realize, well, maybe this isn't where we need to be. Maybe we really need to prioritize these things over here, over this right now. But it's just like, a lot of times those questions and those conversations aren't had. And then that leads to even more lack of clarity, right, in progress.
Agreed.
Thank you. Yes, great answers. So final question for our experts here today. And I want to thank you, Pamela Murphy and Cherie Webb, for being here. We did have one other co-host, Steve Vetter, who was unable to make it, but maybe you'll see him on another LinkedIn Live. Final question, and Pamela, we'll start with you. A company is growing, but the owner is still involved in every decision. What bottleneck does that usually point to?
Yeah, this can be a very common thing for leaders and owners, especially if you're a startup, right? That can be very common. I call it decision dependency. I think I stole that from someone. That is not my coin language, but it really is. It's where leaders are just in the weeds on everything. And again, I think this goes back to, when I think of, we've all been in these situations where there's not that consistent communication on decision-making roles. So what happens is folks are waiting around for an owner's approval, right? On routine decisions that they don't even need to be involved with. Mm-hmm. And so I think, something that you could think about as a leader is, how do you define kind of what decisions can be made without you, right? What can be made without you? What needs to come through you? What do you need to have eyes on? I think that needs to be done pretty quickly. Otherwise, that can cause a lot of unnecessary, honestly, chaos among your staff. And again, going back to my systems approach, I always think about, as a leader, part of your job, and I really think what makes great leaders stand apart is that you build your leadership capacity and then you define what that capacity looks like. So what I mean is part of a leader's job is to hire well and hire good talent, right? Talent that you can then delegate to, or creating, and Cherie knows all about this, and I know she could talk to it, but creating escalation pathways. The leader doesn't always need to know every little fire that goes on, but the leader needs to define what that looks like. Part of the issue happens when the leader doesn't define that, so then the staff doesn't know, so they're running around and they're just elevating it because they think that the leader needs to know. So I think it's really like a leadership. I think of it as like creating a leadership capacity pipeline is really what it is as a leader. That's our role.
You said it. I think I'm going to sum it up in 3 things. The first one, you touched on it, hire well. It's a cliche, but hire people that are smarter than you and let them do their thing. The other thing is the decision fatigue that people have because they're like, oh, I need to do this, but they can't do it until they get the approval to do it. And this is something that was introduced to me a long time ago, and I'm not going to say how long because that'll date me, but a good old-fashioned RACI model is a wonderful thing. Because if people know who's responsible, who's accountable, who just needs to be consulted and or informed, that gives people the power to execute what they need to execute. And then the final thing, so that's 4 instead of 3, is good old-fashioned trust. The people that you hire them for a reason, so trust them to make the decisions that are best for not only your company, but for their careers. And I think that when we do that and we're giving the proper feedback and it goes back to good communication. If we're giving them the proper feedback and the proper guidance, I think that we will find that a lot of these founders that are taking on more than what they probably should can be relinquished of a lot of that work.
Thank you. Well, thank you both. You can connect with Pamela Murphy and Cherie Webb, and then also Steve Vetter on LinkedIn. You can find them and connect with them. You can also, thank you for those that are on here live, and then those that are watching the recording. You can go to fractionalexecutiveconnection.com, and you can look up our experts and contact them directly. So thank you, everyone, for being here. And Cherie and Pamela, thank you for being our experts for today.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks so much.